I'm a sex therapist, so obviously I talk a lot about pleasure, but I talk about it from this place of it can be our compass. And when you are a trans or non binary person, often that means that you have felt disconnected from your body in some way. Right. There's a really broad range of that. And that's certainly not only true for trans and non binary folks, but helping clients get back connected to their body in a way that feels safe and affirming for them often gives them the data they need to be able to make more decisions from that pleasure compass, from that gut intuition and that self-trust.
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show, where I just interviewed a fascinating guest named Rae McDaniel, who is a non-binary speaker, author, therapist, certified sex therapist, coach, and transgender diversity and inclusion educator. Rae helps audiences gain the sheer audacity to be themselves in the world through play, pleasure, and possibility. Their book, Gender Magic, is a first-of-its-kind practical guide to achieving gender freedom with joy, curiosity, and pleasure for transgender and non-binary individuals, gender explorers, and those who love them. They've been featured in high-profile media such as the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, Time, and Women's Health. As a sought-after professional speaker, Rae has spoken at Rutgers University, the University of Chicago, University of Illinois at Chicago, Soho House, The Wing, and Rachel Rogers, ROI, the Millionaire Summit. I had a lovely conversation with Rae. I actually think I found them online through their work on Instagram, maybe, or their Instagram account. And I feel like Rae has taught me so much and is so inviting. So I hope that you enjoy this interview with Rae McDaniel as much as I enjoyed interviewing them. I'm super excited to welcome Rae McDaniel to the Terri Cole Show. Rae, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. Oh my God, you have such a nice voice. And I know everyone tells you that, but you really do.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Does everyone tell you that though?
A lot of people do. Yes. I got the compliment in the past few years that it sounds like I have a radio voice, and I'm like, mission accomplished.
You're like, excellent. All right. So I was just telling the audience all about you, what you do, about your book. But what I really want to know, and I love to start sort of with, how did you get here? What is your, how Marvel Universe has all the origin stories. What is Rae McDaniel's origin story?
Oh my. Well, mine is really interesting and unusual. So the very, very beginning of my origin story is that I grew up as the adopted child of evangelical Southern Baptist missionary puppeteers. So that's going way back there. And as you can imagine, since I'm now a trans, queer, gender and sex therapist and speaker about authenticity, that has been quite a winding road for me. I feel like very young because of my experiences growing up. I got interested in psychology in undergrad and specifically helping folks who shared identities with me, who were queer, trans, non-binary, and that has really guided my career all the way through. So I started my own practice in 2018, specifically serving the queer community in Chicago, which has now grown to 20-ish therapists serving over 450 clients yearly. And it also brought me to the place where I published Gender Magic in May of this year to help as many folks as possible develop the skills that they needed to really be authentically themselves in the world.
So let's go back to the childhood thing for a sec, because this is having evangelical Southern Baptist puppeteers as parents. This, for you, the coming out, the changing, the acknowledging who you are and what was happening for you. How did you negotiate that with your family is a better question.
Oh, I love the way you phrased that question. So, growing up, I think because there were so many things that I had to move through to get to the point where I could even acknowledge my queer identity, I wasn't out even to myself as I was growing up. I always felt like there was something that was off, or I didn't feel like I fit or belonged, but I couldn't put my finger on why. It wasn't until really I got to late college or grad school that the light bulb kind of went off for me. And I started acknowledging my queer identity and then ultimately my trans identity as well. As you can probably imagine from the way I described my family, it didn't go over well when I came out to them. My dad threatened to get a restraining order against me. There's a lot of
Mm,
tension there still. So, how I navigate that now, and I am still in somewhat contact with them, I do see them occasionally, is it's always this inner negotiation between I always want to be authentically myself, and I also want to keep myself safe. So sometimes what it means to be
mm,
authentically me is choosing to not share a part of my identity with them because it's not emotionally safe to do so.
yeah,
And part of that means that I set boundaries for myself around how often I see them, about what topics of conversation I'm willing to get into with them, about how much I communicate with them when we're
yeah.
not physically together. And that has worked well. And it is
Mhm.
a constant negotiation.
Yeah. And really, you're talking about emotional boundaries. Like, how close can I be to you and still be safe and protect myself? And I think that this can be difficult for people to look at. It's really the negotiations we do if we're healthy in almost every friggin' relationship in our lives, right? We are making decisions about who is emotionally trustworthy, who am I safe to be myself with? What I find though, your work is in some respects, honestly, Rae, your work is for everyone because
Mhm.
it's for anyone who is questioning or anyone who is curious, who isn't in some ways seeking, especially in younger folks, more help to self understand. And I think that you're really leading the way by the way that you talk about it, by the way that you so honestly and authentically share about it. But you're also normalizing these conversations that I feel like we have not been having. So, what has the response been to your book?
The response to Gender Magic has been so positive and so heartwarming. Been really beautiful to see. I've had so many people who have messaged me online or sent me emails who share about the amazing impact that it's having on them. And hearing those stories always connects me to my why. And it's not only people who identify as trans or non binary,
Right.
but those who love them, those who are supporting them. And like you're saying, gender magic and my work really is for everyone. I
Yep.
focus so much of my work on the topic of gender. And within that, I think as you can imagine, gender impacts us all. Every
Yeah.
single one of us, whether we are trans or non binary, or whether we are cisgender, gender
Yep.
has played a role in how we show up in the world. And my work
Yeah.
ultimately is about not transness, but gender freedom. And how can
Mm,
each of us relate to gender and intentionally choose how we want to show up in the world on the basis of who we are. And beyond that, the sneaky thing about gender magic in my work is that it is general life support, skills, advice that is applicable to so many things that I am putting into a package of gender for this particular work. But a lot of people have mentioned that they got a lot out of it, even beyond the topic of gender.
What I love about the like following you on Insta and the what you put out there is a really inclusive vibe. So because I feel like with the cisgender folks who want to be allies, who want to be supportive, there is so much fear. My God, there's so much fear in doing it wrong, saying it wrong, not understanding what the hell is going on, using the wrong terms, doing it raw. And I find that your work is very inviting for anyone who is actually interested in allyship in a real way, and what that looks like. Because I think that for many of us who feel like we're allies, who want to be allies, it's like, especially if you're in the public eye, you feel like you should have it all friggin' figured out, like you should be doing it right. It's there. No, like I discovered a couple of years, I decided a couple of years ago that if I were going to actually be an ally in any real way, I was just going to have to accept that I was going to probably friggin' do it wrong at some point, and just then be sorry and change it. Like, you can't be so afraid that you don't talk about it at all, or that you're not inclusive yourself. At least that's how I felt about it. But I saw in the beginning that I really was like, oh, looking up all the terms and I got to do everything right. I'm like, is your heart in the right place? Learn. Don't put it on other people to learn. Take it upon yourself to learn. Take responsibility to learn. So, but I do appreciate, and I think part of how I got turned on to your work was in my searching in my own allyship of like, who is kind of talking to me too? And I feel like you are very inclusive in talking to all the people. And it makes sense that your book is that people, family of loved ones, and loved ones of trans folks, binary, non-binary folks are finding your book and feeling like, oh, there's a place for me here too, which I think you've done a great job. So let's talk about, for you, what do you see as people come to you? What are some of the biggest struggles that people are dealing with when it comes to gender?
I think one of the biggest is that it feels like such a big topic. I've had a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people who have come into my office with this big question of, am I trans? And honestly, I have found that that is not generally the most helpful question, because it is so big and people get easily flooded and easily overwhelmed by the bigness of that question. So I ask people to take a step back, and instead of trying to answer that question as the first question, answer, what tiniest, easiest step helps me feel more authentic, more free, and more like myself. And let's start there. And it can
Mm-hmm.
be the tiniest thing. But if we start there and don't worry about step 10 down the road,
Yeah,
it makes every step of the journey feel so much easier and more supported. So that, I think, would be the
yeah.
number one thing.
What I think is super helpful about some stuff that you're putting out there is about the what you're saying, that taking the small step, but how trusting your gut, that if you take the small step, right, you don't have to answer the am I trans or am I transitioning or am I, right? One thing you would put up was talking about, you could make an appointment to talk to your doctor about hormones, see how that
Mm-hmm.
feels, take that meeting, see how that feels. And it's interesting because with therapy clients, I similarly will say your truth will be revealed if you keep taking steps, small steps, baby steps, but in the direction of something. If you're feeling dissatisfied, and if you're not going the right way, your body will tell you. You'll know. But it's being in the all or nothing vibe is so overwhelming, because who knows, if you haven't explored it, if you haven't talked about it, you really don't know. So let's move into, for you, because part of what you're putting out there in the world and helping people do is be more self-confident, more in a more proactive sort of state of mind. So how would you say people can move from anxiety, self-doubt, and fear to a more confident, proactive state of mind?
You hit on it exactly just a minute ago. So you said in your work, you ask people to move towards something. That's it. That is the key. You also mentioned earlier being afraid as an ally to move forward and to make a mistake. And
Mhm.
as you know, as I know, as a lot of the listeners know, moving and making changes in your life from a place of fear, from a place of being flooded, is is going to make that process harder. You know, when we're in a fear state of mind, we're in survival. We are running away from something,
Mhm.
and that limits our ability to make more easeful decisions, to feel more grounded in our body, and to ultimately know where we're even running to. So,
Right.
if we're talking about moving to this more proactive state of mind, moving out of this anxious place, the first thing that we can do is increase our imagination. So, I don't mean by that that we have to know what step 10 is. Like I was saying, we don't have to know exactly where we're headed. But if I can help my clients develop a positive vision for their life, what it could look like, then we are able to move towards that positive vision versus being so concerned with what we are moving away from. So I'll give you an example to kind of bring it down to earth. Instead of a client coming in and saying, or a client working from a place of, I want to get away from the person I used to be, and I don't want any stranger on the street to misgender me. That's my goal. Well, that's a goal that is about fear
Mhm.
often. If we can help clients, if I can help my clients move to a place of, how do you want to feel? I want to feel like in my everyday life that I get to be me. I want to be surrounded by a close knit group of chosen family who see me and love me for who I am. I want to wear clothing that I feel like represents who I am. That is a much more powerful place to make decisions from. And we're in that front part of our brain. So those decisions come easier and we're able to move in a much more grounded way.
That's so beautiful and it's so true because when you think about if someone's goal is to never be misgendered, you're like you have exactly zero control over that. You can decide how you'll respond when you are misgendered because you will be. You
Hmm.
can decide how the language you'll use and how you will correct people. But again, when you're looking at that example, that is not on your side of the street,
Mm-mm.
right? But helping them envision their life, deciding how you want to feel in your daily life. Now that's all your side of the street. And that's something you can do. And it's interesting. The second you started sort of saying the scenario, I went from feeling anxious about the trying to control the stranger to like expansive in the what could it be? What could it look like? What is possible? And I imagine that's super valuable for folks who've been marginalized in their lives. Maybe they haven't seen how it could be. Maybe it's like you're holding that vision for them until they can get there. It's like I feel that way about
Hmm.
my therapy clients at times. Like even if they're hopeless, like I'll hold on to the hope until they can sort of get to that place.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Sometimes my role is holding that hope for them when they
Right.
can't quite see that possibility, and encouraging them to do it scared, to take that step anyway. And let's see if it does feel more expansive. Let's see if we can notice when our body feels pleasure, when our
Right.
gut says yes, and allow that to be our compass instead of that fear.
Yeah. And again, it's dialing into the body wisdom. Like if it doesn't feel that way, then you can stop going down that path. But there's got to be this, instead of all of the intellectualization and fear mind, which is so much, I imagine, of what's happening in an unsafe world, being able to dial into how you actually physically feel is such a great embodiment. It's just such a great thing to do. And I feel like most of us don't stop and do it. I mean, unless you have a practice where you're doing it, you know?
Yep. Absolutely. And in Gender Magic, I talk a lot about pleasure. And, I'm a sex therapist. So obviously, I talk a lot about pleasure. But I talk about it from this place of it can be our compass. And when you are a trans or non binary person, often that means that you have felt disconnected from your body in some way, right? There's a really broad range of that. And that's certainly not only true for trans and non binary folks, but helping clients get back connected to their body in a way that feels safe and affirming for them often gives them the data they need to be able to make more decisions from that pleasure compass, from that gut intuition and that self trust, which is truly the biggest gift.
Yeah. All right. So where does, with all of this, where does shame fit into the package of, because even without the whole gender piece, being a sex therapist in the United States of America, you might as well just write shame in big letters because people are still so puritanical and, uptight about sex in general. So let's talk a little bit about shame, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many directions that I could go with that. My initial very flip answer is that shame has no place in this conversation. And wanting to stay grounded in. We live in the world that we live in. So, yeah, it's going to come up
Right.
around sexuality related topics, around gender and around bodies and a myriad of other things.
Yeah.
I'm a Brene Brownite, like most of us. So I really
Mhm.
follow her teachings around shame and that it doesn't like to live in the dark. So being able to have a safe place to express that, I think often comes first in being able
Mm.
to name it, being able to dissolve it a bit. And I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier having a support system and a chosen family that sees you for who you are.
Mm.
That is, I think, one of the biggest shame inoculators that we can have. And
Mm.
that is beautiful because it is accessible. And coming from the deep south and a very conservative family, I understand that folks might be in geographic areas where that might not feel accessible. But I guarantee that there are people either in your geographic area or online that will see you, love you, and accept you for who you are. And when you have that, it makes it so much easier to look at the people who might be trying to shame you
Yep.
and letting that roll off your back because you know that the people who love you for who you are.
Yep. That's so powerful. It's really so powerful. And it kind of goes into another thing that you talk about in the book, which is so important, is intimacy in friendships and sort of the power of that. So let's talk a little bit about why you included that and what your own experience is.
Yes. So I included it for several reasons. One of the biggest one is that I have been so lucky in my life to find a really incredible chosen family of intimate friends that they are as important to me as my romantic relationships. And in our culture, in American culture, we often put romantic and sexual relationships on this pedestal of these relationships are intimate and all other relationships are some kind of a lesser intimacy. And one of the beautiful things about queer community that I want to share, yes, with other queer folks, but definitely beyond that, is that intimacy, deep, meaningful, committed intimacy is available in our friendships. Yet we often cut that short because of these cultural messages that friendships are not as important as romantic or sexual relationships. So I included it in Gender Magic as an invitation to consider ways that people might be able to build deeper and more committed relationships with non-sexual and non-romantic partners, and the ways that that could look, including, this might not be for everybody, but in Gender
Mhm.
Magic, I talk about physical intimacy as well. And I tell a story about a friend that one of the ways that we connect is by taking baths with each other. And
Mhm.
it's this like really cute thing that we've been doing for years, and it blows people's mind sometimes. Like, whoa, what you do? What? Uh, and again, that's not for everybody, but I bring that up to say we have limited ourselves in so many ways about what sorts of connections we can have and what they can mean for us. And if we are striving to lead an authentic, shame-free life,
Mhm.
then those relationships are going to be the ones that hold you up.
Right. It's so interesting though that the relationships, and I'm always saying this with my therapy clients who have problematic family relationships, that chosen family is where it's at, and it's just as important. And I literally have had the same girlfriend since Nixon was in office, I like to say, but literally, like, I swear to God, since second grade, like many
That's
decades.
beautiful.
And I say exactly the same, that they are essential to my happiness, and that they're as important to me as my husband and my kids. Like, I cannot do without them. And so I really think I love the way that you frame it in the book, and I love the sort of bringing the conversation to the fore. So especially if folks have disappointing families of origin, which many do, if you're, in this world of transitioning, being gender fluid, being non-binary, you maybe don't have an accepting family, but that's okay, because you can create a family. There's also, I don't know if you're familiar, I imagine you might be, but familiar with this group of people who will be your substitute parents at your
I've
wedding.
heard
Or
of that. Yeah, it like warms my heart every time I see that.
I swear to God, I've saved it, and I'm like, I want to be one of those moms, those like rent-a-moms who just go to all the things.
Oh, that's
And
amazing and beautiful.
but it's so true. It's like why not? That what you said before really touched me about you can find people who will see you and who will love you, but you have to keep looking. Like don't just stop. Right?
Mm-mm.
If you're in a place where you don't feel seen or you don't feel loved, know that there are people out there and there are communities out there who will welcome you, and that it's being in that, denial of self is also so lonely, even if it means you get to fit in one place. But the self abandonment eventually, it's just too heavy, I think.
Yep, I completely agree. And they're out there, I promise.
Yeah, they really are. So tell us where you like to hang out. What are you excited about right now?
Well, still very excited about Gender Magic. So
Yeah,
that's the
man.
main thing. I am hanging out on my website at ray-mcdaniel.com. You can find me there. Instagram is my hub online. You can find me there at the Rae McDaniel, and that's Rae, RAE. So that is a fantastic place to connect with me. And if you're interested in my therapy practice, you can find that at practicalaudacity.com.
Excellent. Okay, so I have a question for you that I ask most people about boundaries. Personally, what has been your most challenging boundary struggle, and how did you overcome it, if you have?
Ooh, that is a great question. I believe that my biggest boundary struggle is probably with self boundaries. I love to work. I'm really passionate about what I do, and it's very easy for work to completely take over my life very quickly. And
Mm.
I've learned in the past few years, especially, and as an entrepreneur, that I have to set schedule boundaries with myself about when I am available, when I am checking email or Slack, when I am answering things, when I put my phone down for the night. And that is a really hard boundary to keep and hold, but I think I've done a good job in the past few years. And some of that is having a great team and having good support around me in my business that allows me to be able to do that. But having that meant that I had to put a lot of time and effort into developing that. And so I think that has been the secret to keeping my time boundaries and building a life that is sustainable.
Exactly. Well, this has been fascinating and lovely and wonderful. And I super appreciate the work you're doing in the world. And I appreciate the time you spent with us today. So thank you for being here, Rae.
Thank you so much for having me, Terri. It was a pleasure.